Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. I am here today with a short podcast with my co-host, JC.
Hey everyone.
We often get asked questions or random topics come up during our big podcast. And I always am scribbling notes down and say, okay, we got to talk about that, but we don't have to talk about that for an hour. So, and I'm not an expert at everything. So sometimes I have to go look things up. But one thing that has come up recently, and I don't remember if it was one of our podcasts or at a training that I was doing, was about workers' compensation fraud. And so, you know, it is indeed true that sometimes a workers' compensation claim could be fraud, but I want to make sure that you don't automatically assume that anybody who says, hey, boss, I got injured at work, that you're going, hey, they're actually lying, because you have to take action if somebody states clearly they've got injured and want to file worker comp, or if they just say, I think I'm injured, you need to know what to do next.
Hey, I just broke my elbow. That's cool. Pick that box up. Prove it. Don't do that. Don't do that.
No, because you could cause a worse injury, which, by the way, you're still going to be responsible for. But the thing that is unfortunate, and I see all too often, is often our problem employees, not always, but often our problem employees, meaning they have performance issues, they have behavior issues, they have attendance issues. All too often, I see they're also the ones that are probably getting hurt at work. And yeah, sometimes it can be fraud because they know their job's on the line and they need that money to pay their bills and feed their family. So they turn over and say, you know what, I'm gonna make sure I talk about this injury in the workplace, or, you know, potentially fraudulently injure themselves. They are truly injured, but they may not have done it at work, or they may have purposely tripped over a box and now want to claim workers' compensation so that they don't have to work and they could collect money while they're looking for another job or just while they're sitting home.
Record keeping in that instance really comes out to be important, right, Wendy?
Absolutely. And again, going back to training your managers, HR is there. If you have an HR department, HR is there to help and say, oh, the manager or the employee said there's an injury. I need to go to HR or whoever it is and get this form and send them here. Depending on what state you are in, you might have to send them to an urgent care, an emergency room. You may have to do drug testing depending on what state you're in, because different states have different laws regarding what workers' compensation. So your managers, your supervisors, your team leads that are there on the overnight shift, for example, they at least have to know the 411 of, oops, somebody said they're injured. What do I do next?
Fire them.
Do not fire them.
Okay,
now,
don't fire
in some cases, you know, I've even done this in some cases where it's a new client and I'm like, I don't know. I just got you as a client and I was not hired to help you with workers' comp, but they usually call me anyways, where I say, I don't know what to do right now. Give me a hot minute to do some research. In the meantime, have them sit down in an office, get ice, whatever it is. If they're bleeding, obviously attain to that, call an ambulance.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Call an ambulance. The other thing that speaking though of 911 or the ambulance, is if somebody is injured and it's obvious that they're injured, whether they forced the injury or if it was an accident, a true accident, you may not want to automatically have a coworker drive them to the emergency room or the urgent care, because what if something happens to that coworker in the process? What if they get in an accident? Now you have two people. Or what if the person who is injured becomes distraught, violent, or stops breathing on the way to that, you know, ambulance or to the urgent care of the hospital?
You don't want nothing to do with that.
No, you're just making it worse. So even if you're going, you know what, I don't want to pay the ambulance bill, so I'm gonna go drive them myself. Odds are, depending on the severity of the injury, you know, odds are pretty good that you should always call an ambulance, so that they are being taken care of by professionals from the beginning.
There are certain types of injuries and illness not covered by workers' compensation. These include injuries sustained while the employee was engaging in illegal activities or violations of company policy. Injuries sustained while the employee was under the influence of alcohol and or drugs. Injuries sustained, and that's an intriguing one, especially if someone has a medical accommodation and they're on drugs, but that's We'll come back to you in a minute on that one. Injuries sustained as a result of the employee's own intentional actions or self-inflicted injuries. They threw the box at themselves. Injuries sustained while the employee was engaging in horseplay or other activities that are not related to their job duties. There's 4 that I have for you. Did I get those right?
Absolutely. And so the act of God part there is, which I don't like having God in a law, but it is what it is. We've got to deal with that. There is a National Conference of State Legislators. It's NCSL.org. But if you just, go to National Conference of State Legislators, and if you're working in a lot of different states, this might help you determine, okay, is there some kind of issue like COVID, which is still very prevalent right now, and now we have some other diseases coming out as well. One of the questions that I had in the past few years by almost all my clients is COVID covered under workers' comp? And so the answer is it depends. And it depends on what state you're in. So, this goes down to not a federal law, but it's every single state has a different meaning of, okay, is it covered or is it not? And so there's a giant list on the NCSL.org. You can I literally just Googled, is COVID covered under workers' comp? And that was one of the first links that came up. But you can see that there's a lot of states. It says here, in total, 28 states and Puerto Rico have taken action to extend workers' compensation coverage to include COVID-19 as a work-related illness. But you have to prove, which is very difficult, that the employee got it at the workplace. And how would somebody improve that is, you just shut down your organization because everybody has COVID. That's probably going to lean towards, yep, it's workers' comp.
Hey, I've got something that I've kept in my hip pocket. I want to bring it out for you, Wendy, and tell me what you think about this. I know that we've got a lot of people from different industries listening to the program, right? This one here is very specific for the construction industry to keep in mind. There are more reporting requirements in construction that will affect workers' compensation in the year to come. Construction enterprises with at least 250 employees must send OSHA Form 300, a log of work-related injuries and illness, and Form 301, an injury and illness incident report. In 2018, the rule was amended because business people feared OSHA would post employer information online via electronic reports. Companies just had to submit in summary data on OSHA Form 300A, that list of work-related injuries. So OSHA has recommended reverting to the 2016 version of the regulation, which requires firms to disclose every injury and sickness, even if they've been following OSHA's guidelines. Also, organizations with 100 or more employees must submit these reports. It requires more corporations to report to OSHA and make those injury reports available and make them public. This proposed rule might add to businesses' worries and require stronger data collection and safety procedures, but OSHA's intention to release injury data can raise workers' compensation premiums. So if insurance firms gain access to OSHA's public records, they could also add new exclusions and hike workers' compensation rates and costs at the same time. So just a few things to consider. There are big changes every new year in different industries, but this was one in the construction sector that popped out to me that I wanted to bring to the table for you.
Yeah, above and beyond the construction sector as well, every organization that has 10 employees or more, if you're construction or not, you have record-keeping requirements for workplace injuries and illnesses. If it's just minor first aid, it doesn't need to go on these OSHA 300 logs. But as you grow larger, and then certain industries like JC mentioned, you do have to track all of your injuries, and it may or may not include COVID or other communicable diseases like, influenza. And now we're getting into a few other things. So, food for thought there. You could find a lot of advice on the OSHA website, OSHA.gov. It was definitely a highly contentious website during the main period of COVID because, the laws were changing literally every day, and we were all just left in a mess. But going back to the idea of fraud, though, I want you to make sure that, yes, workers' compensation fraud may happen, but leave that up to the workers' compensation company to decide, not you.
Excellent
so as
point.
HR or anybody who's acting as HR, somebody comes to you and say they have an illness or an injury and it's while they're at work and it's from work, instead of rolling your eyes, you just pull out that workers' comp form and say, here, you need to complete this and you need to go see a doctor, or, if it's something that's serious right then and there, you call 911 and you get them in an ambulance and get them taken care of. I have had to deal with workers' compensation fraud issues before and with my clients. And then, basically what happens most of the time is they know that, oh, you're being serious, and then they don't end up filling out the forms, or they fill out the original form, the employee I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then the workers' compensation company is like, they're not answering our calls, our emails, we can't get in touch with them. And it just basically goes away. And then you don't end up having to pay for those bills because they never end up going to see the doctor. But there are many people out there that know how to work the system. And, you can't, you shouldn't be asking in interviews or anything like that about workers' comp claims, because most worker comp claims are actually legit. There just are a lot of bad people out there in the world. And so rule of thumb for me is you HR don't decide that it's fraud. You let the workers' comp insurance company or your lawyer decide that it's fraud. And you kind of say, okay, I'm going to play by the book. And then that way I won't get accused of making the employee suffer more than they already should.
I'm instantly thinking about what that interview question looks like. Hey, I saw your most recent workers' comp fraud claim went through and you got paid well. Tell me more about how you cheated the company. Like, really, be careful there. Absolutely. Hey, Wendy, we're nearing that time. I want to throw it back to you for any final thoughts there before you want to move on.
The one final thought that I would say here is please make sure every year that you are looking at your workers' comp insurance policy and, go out and get quotes from someone else. Workers' comp is extremely expensive, especially in safety sensitive companies. And so it'll be worth your time in order to get a quote from other companies. And workers' comp, like any insurance, it's pretty much the same anywhere. What the difference is the service. So make sure you're asking for more and more from your workers' comp companies than you were in the past, because HR is hard. Managing people is hard. And we're not going to be experts at all of this. With that said, thanks for joining. Take care.